Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about the very challenging topic of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. This comes up at all points in our life, right? I even see it in like my 2-year-old, if her sister hits her in the head on accident. Can my 5-year-old, which we try to facilitate in a non-coercive way, but we try to facilitate, like, how do you make amends? How do you say, I'm sorry? Can you kiss her, give her a hug? And then saying it's okay, giving forgiveness.
Yeah. And it could look different for different people.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
A lot of people are like, well, what is that? Yeah, it's a good question. What is that for you? What would that look like for you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because research definitely shows it's one of the most important things in relationships to have them move on and for them to be healthy and for the satisfaction to be high is being able to forgive.
Like that healing property that comes with it.
Because what happens if you don't?
Oof. I think about like the effects of cortisol, the effects of resentment.
Yeah.
It is not good for our body on multiple levels, not just psychologically, but we can talk about cardiovascular impacts or impacts to our brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And cortisol, the stress hormone, right? I mean, and that's the thing is, if we aren't forgiving and finding ways, whatever that looks like, maybe you don't use the term, you can say acceptance or make peace with. If you're not able to, and we hold on to those bitterness, those feelings, can you ever be present or enjoy the present with that person? Whether that's a family member relationship or a friend or your loved one. And if you continue to do that, right?
Or other people, right? If I have this big rupture, and some ruptures are bigger than others, right? But I have a big rupture. What if it impacts the way I trust other people? What if it impacts the way I relate to other people? And I'm not able to let some of that go. It's going to keep me at an arm's distance from everyone in my circle.
Yeah. And finding a way to forgive that you feel will help.
I can.
Yeah.
I can. Because if I can forgive, if I can start to accept the circumstances, I can also forgive myself. So I take the blame away from myself. I start to trust myself more. I maybe start to trust the other person more. I often find, like, in acceptance work with clients, we find solutions to prevent that from happening again. We find ways to protect ourselves. We find ways to give ourselves grace. And I think that helps people kind of put their guards down and let people back in.
Yeah. And I think kind of that idea of letting people back in, because if we're not able to forgive or move on, then can we have compassion for that person? And I feel like compassion is a way to move on and forgive, is understanding what were the context of this. Is this person's character? Is this who they are? And therefore, like, you'll never forgive them and we're just going to harbor this and we can't get through this. And it's always going to show up in fights. I'm always going to bring this resentment up. Or is it they're human? They make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I'm not perfect. Like, how can we have compassion for the humanness of what happened?
And I want to parcel two things out. You have your big, like, capital T purposeful trauma, say abuse or sexual assault or things like this. Just because, so if you do that assessment of, is this their character or is it a one-time mistake? Okay, what if it is their character? What if they're just a shitty human? You can still find forgiveness, right? Forgiveness doesn't mean that I let go of my boundaries. It doesn't mean that I relinquish power, which we can talk about more in a minute. It is an act of healing within myself. It's saying, I'm not going to hold this anger, this resentment, this fear, this bitterness on anymore. I'm going to let it wash from my body. Often I think of it as a very visual thing. And that can still be possible even when we have that value judgment of, like, no, they're just a holy shitty person, right? Holy as in, like, the whole self.
Yeah. I was like, oh, they're holy and shitty.
That's not how I meant that.
Yeah.
And then we have our small t's, right?
Yeah.
Which are some of the transgressions that happen day to day or an accident or things like that. But there is room for forgiveness, even in those biggest of pain moments, down to the smallest.
Yeah. And I love that, because maybe the forgiveness is with yourself. And this is what, going back to that question of what does that look like? I look at it in the context of, like, a relationship, whether that's with your romantic partner or family member, is what does that mean to forgive? Does that mean you're letting them get away with it? What does that mean about you? Does that mean you're weak? Really exploring the narrative you have around that. And is that a potential barrier to even forgive? Because what happens if we're not, and we're harboring it, right? The bitterness, the anger, but that brings up a lot of the same negative kind of conflict tactics that people engage in. And the cycle can't break because we can't ever let go of what they've done. So how do you move forward with them? We're stuck. But being able to forgive, you're able to navigate conflict more efficiently, right? With the partner, you're able to kind of move on through those stressful times together. And often what I see too is in those moments where partners are really stuck and being able to kind of look at their partner and be like, okay, and for example, some compassion might come from the fact of like, oh, wow, they're not doing this because they hate my character. They're doing this because this is exactly what their family did.
Or they're stressed out.
And depersonalizing it a little bit, right? Or they're stressed out. And it's not, again, what you said, not accepting that they've done that or that they're doing that and being like kind of a continual victim. It's really understanding where they're coming from so you can have some compassion to move forward, because it will not move forward if we can't let go.
And accept that it has happened. Cannot change it once it's happened, right? Accepting that it has happened. Accepting the fallout. Accepting the pain, the hurt, the anger I might feel, they might feel. And how do we move through that rather than carry that with us? Yeah.
And quite frankly, in this assessment for yourself, is this somebody that you want to? And if you can't, then maybe that's not something that's going to continue. See, I'm a big lover of forgiveness, even if you have no intent of ever talking to that person again. Because do you want it to remain this pebble that hangs out in your backpack and then you're stacking up pebbles? Like, I love my backpack, right? And I think about pebbles, rocks. What do we carry on our back all the time? Do I really want to carry that with me? Some of the most profound things like I've seen in forgiveness is I watch some court shows. Yes, I'm corny. And when someone does a violent crime to another person's loved one and their parents or remaining loved ones say, I forgive you for that. Right? We can forgive someone and still hurt, still be sad, still not understand it. But we can forgive them, because often forgiveness isn't just about the other person. It's about for us. Releasing ourselves from pain, releasing ourselves from the anger, the hurt, the resentment, the mistrust. And kind of what I guess was, I forgot to say this a little bit ago, is what happens when you can't is now you engage in a lot of confirmation bias. Say more about that. So we start confirmation bias is when we tend to really confirm our own bias of our belief about somebody. So if we believe that they don't love me, then we're going to find all the evidence that they don't love me. If I, believe that they don't have my best interest at heart, I'm going to find all the evidence for that and ignore everything else. And it makes it even more difficult to let go, because now you're just piling up those pebbles, if you will, and reasons to not. And so taking time away and being very intentional about, well, what are some things that they're doing that do show that? What are evidence for that? To kind of get out of that cycle, because it's inevitable when we're really wanting to validate our own feelings of injustice that's happened to us. I see this happen after things like infidelity, especially. Yeah. How do I know they're not going to do it again? If I forgive them, it gives them permission to do it again. It tells them what they did was okay. Well, it can feel like that's the message. That's not at all the intent of forgiveness. The intent of forgiveness is saying, okay, I acknowledge what has happened. It hurts. And I want to actively move forward. Again, that doesn't mean that you can't be sad or angry ever again. But it means that I'm not going to sit here and think about it, ruminate, harbor, all the things. Yeah. And you can't put your forgiveness conditional upon the other person changing. 100%. Because they're not going to change if you continue not to forgive. Because you have to be in a place to be present and willing to move forward. But you can't do that if you're harboring those feelings, because confirmation bias is still happening, right? Finding those reasons of why they're like, it's almost like an assessment. They feel like they're on trial. A lot of partners who have engaged in the infidelity feel like they're on trial. And they're always like, I can't do X, Y, Z because they're going to feel X, Y, Z, So it's a little bit of both that has to happen. And it's very dangerous to put your forgiveness conditional upon somebody else, because guess what? They're human. They're imperfect. And we're going to make mistakes. Sometimes I hear partners talk about, like, I don't want to give forgiveness because they haven't earned it, or they, oh gosh, it becomes this like bargaining chip of power. Yeah. And when we don't forgive, then we might cycle into a place of punishment. If I can't forgive you, I'm going to punish you for that act until I'm ready to forgive you.
And that is a dangerous place to be in a relationship. We even see it show up in parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. AKA you're holding it over their heads. Yeah. Not healthy.
No.
By any
for anyone, whether it's your internal self, your mental health, your partner, even the ripple effect, right? If your friends are witnessing you do this, what do you think their perception of your ability to forgive or wanting to be in a relationship with you might be?
And sometimes that's an issue. The narrative they have is coming from friends or family of like, you're still with that piece of shit, right? Well,
that doesn't help anyone. Right? So it's really getting clear with yourself on, do you want to forgive? Do you want to move forward? If not, what are the consequences of that? What other choices do I need to make? If I am, does forgiveness mean I still have to be in a relationship with them? No. Does forgiveness mean that I have to break it off? No. You get to also choose how that path goes.
Yeah. It's very tough. Very, very tough. And again, when we and I hear this too, again, going back to the conditional pieces, if this partner does X, then I'll forgive. Okay, then the partner does do it. But then they make a mistake again. And maybe not as big as like say infidelity.
I knew they'd do it.
I knew they'd do it. So now you have to do this again. And it's this continual like barometer, right, that they're using to measure their partner's success or failure for them. And they're willing to forgive based on that success or failure. And I mean, that's not healthy for the other partner. They become helpless. Then they give up and they stop trying. And then guess what's happening? Your bias is now confirmed. They don't care, right?
100%. And how do I encourage couples to go back to like, what shit would you have let slide before the infidelity? Can we get back to a place where you can let that stuff slide again? Right? Am I going to let another infidelity slide? No. Right? That's going to be a hard boundary of, I cannot tolerate infidelity. If that happens again, here's
and what does that look like?
Sure.
It may not have to be the same extent of like, say, physical sex, but if you look at porn, I'm also not okay with it or whatever.
But can I let go if they forget the dishes or if they irritate me or whatever it might be? Those normal day-to-day things, can I let those go? Or am I going to keep tally of every single transgression that happens between the two of us?
And that's what happens in our minds when we're in a place where we haven't forgiven. And it goes a lot back to what you said is we're really releasing it for ourselves. Again, we don't have to decide to stay with them, but we don't want this to control us anymore.
That for selves, I have thought about whether or not to share this, but when my mom was passing away, a big piece of my grief experience with her was her and I had kind of like a come to Jesus between the two of us because we had a hard relationship and there was abuse and neglect and just not good stuff on both sides. And in her final week of being here, the greatest gift, and I think I said this on a previous episode, the greatest gift my husband has ever given me was time with her to go through this process. And we sat and forgave one another and talked about, man, that really sucked. And I'm sorry that happened. And I'm sorry I did that. That was the best thing that's ever happened in my space, right? Because then I'm not left even after the death and dying of, I wanted to say, I wanted to ask, I wanted to heal. Prioritize forgiveness when you can, even in those moments of death and dying or crisis or whatever it might be. It's not just the day-to-day, but if it feels like something you want to talk about it. And for me, like that's been my biggest experience with forgiveness is letting that go. And the amount of healing that happened in that day was incredible. And that's what I mean by like forgiveness isn't just about the other person. It's also about our own healing. It's about a letting go, a surrendering of this happened and it sucked and it was painful and I wish it hadn't, or maybe I'm okay that it did, but I'm going to let it go.
And if you feel comfortable sharing, you don't have to, is how did you get to that point? Because I feel like a lot of people struggle with like, I just don't know if I'm ready to.
Great question. So for me, it was time and urgency. I knew she was going to die. I knew that we only had a few days left. And to my benefit with being a therapist, like I know what it can look like when people have someone die and they're like, but wait, I had something left to say. And so I created that space and time and really talked to my mom about what I was sorry for. And it led into her saying what she was sorry for. So sometimes forgiveness isn't just about saying you did. It's taking the lead with, hey, I didn't handle that right. And I'm sorry. Or even if someone, can't always name it. I know we had a rough spot, and know that I see that was just a moment. That isn't all of you, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, yeah, I appreciate you sharing, because I think that provides a lot of insight, right? Because there's context of which bring this up for us, and when we're willing to do that. And ideally, we don't want to wait, because how much time could we have had that was in a better relationship before the time, right? Like of her passing away. And it's kind of for ourselves is, what do we need to get there to be ready so it doesn't come to the last moment? And the other piece that comes out of that for me is, it can't be contingent upon them also reciprocating, because I'm thinking about the situation of, I've had clients where they've done similar to what you've done, but the other person did not. And so they had a hard time.
Tough.
And this is why the forgiveness is important, not to be contingent upon what the other person does. And it really goes back to what you're saying. It's really a forgiveness of the self or the situation, or the injustice to yourself.
And I also use that as like a learning moment, right? I wish that there had been healing prior to that moment. Like I wish it didn't take till the last moment to have that. I'm glad it happened. I'm glad it happened the way it did in hindsight, but don't wait. If we can lean into forgiveness on a daily basis, do it. Right? Which is hard. I recognize there are circumstances in which I struggle with my own forgiveness in present day that are hard, really hard.
Yeah.
This is not an easy process, but it can create such healing. And that's what I hope that example brings up, is the depth of healing that can occur when we truly dive into it, not the passive, like, yeah, I forgive you, but truly leaning into it can be profound.
Yeah. And in that context too, and correct me if you feel like that's not the message you were trying to convey, is that there was an excessive influence of your part, which in some situations that people are having difficult forgiving for, that's not the case, because they're like, I literally had nothing to do with it.
I think it's like sexual assault, or abuse.
And in those situations are some people who still blame themselves. I put myself there because that's the tactic, like I
had a drink
perpetrator. Yeah. And so maybe forgiving yourself, like that has nothing to do with me, part of that process. This is a very complex phenomenon to engage in, right? Really, even for ourselves. I mean, this is something that is so profound and impactful in our happiness with ourselves and in relationships, but it's one of the most difficult, because a lot of times we don't understand, like, what is it? So thinking about that, what is that for yourself?
How do I get there? What does it feel like?
Do I even want to use the term forgiveness, or should I use acceptance? What am I okay with in the term of it? Trying to get away from conditions, right? Don't make it conditional upon something external to yourself, because that person might not be alive to do what you need them to do.
Also think about forgiveness. So forgiving ourselves, if I wronged you in some way, right? And I say, I'm sorry, and you don't accept it, just because the other person doesn't accept it doesn't mean I can't have forgiveness for myself.
Yes.
And it goes to that conditional part, right? Of you can still have forgiveness for yourself, for your past mistakes, or for another, without a reciprocal affirmation, essentially.
Yeah. And also, as you kind of something you said earlier about practicing forgiveness more readily, right? And I think it's important to note that just because you're forgiving does not mean you're going to be walked all over, as long as you're also holding up boundaries, because you can forgive
and learn
what boundaries are appropriate, so that, you can prevent that as much as you can from happening again. I mean, it's more difficult, say, if like continual, berating from family members, right? Something like that. But you can put boundaries around them and say, I don't want to hang around them or be in a place where they're going to be.
And one thing that helps me in forgiveness, and I'm curious what you do when you're practicing forgiveness.
I don't. I'm still beating myself up.
Is if I'm trying to forgive someone, if you've listened to our other episodes, it's no secret that I identify as Christian. So I lean on things like prayer. I'll pray for the people I'm angry at. I'll pray for myself to have forgiveness. That really helps. But I also lean towards gratitude. Okay, I'm really angry at this person, but is there something I can be grateful for? Can I appreciate them in some way? Can I appreciate the circumstances that happened in some way? Can I appreciate myself in some way, even with these negative experiences surrounding it? And it helps to kind of soften our lived experience and help us move from just a completely negative place to maybe, okay, there is some positive here. There is some gentleness here, some softness here.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the gratitude is, for me, something that I do as well. But I think the big piece that I do is something that Michelle Becker talked about in our Compassion for Couples episode.
Which, if you haven't checked that out, check it out. It goes in depth about compassion, which pairs well with this.
And there's something that my wife and I do, and my wife in particular said that this works well for her, and it does for me too, is she tends to look at my child self. What happened or what was going on for me and that position to bring me to where I am. And it's a lot more easier to have empathy for the child self than it is to see like this adult that's criticizing her or something, right?
You can picture your partner in their child self.
Yeah. And having that compassion for my younger self helps now. And so when I'm having something with somebody else, I think about like right now, yeah, they're a piece of shit to me. But then I'm like, I can't imagine what they've been through. Like, I wonder what's going on for them. And I try to depersonalize it as much as possible through that compassion. So that's kind of my way. I mean, there's no panacea to this, right? We have to find what's going to work for us. And of course, there's probably still individuals that I'm having to still work through, trying to forgive or come to peace with. So,
or imagining, you brought it up, those circumstances, right? And I think we've talked about this, but I think about like with people cutting us off. Maybe their wife's in labor. Maybe their mom just died. Maybe they have to go to the bathroom. I don't know. Whatever you want to say.
I always use they shit their pants and I just start laughing and I'm like, not mad anymore.
But if we, even with our loved ones, if my partner and I are in a fight, I'm like, God, he's such an asshole today. Thinking about, okay, how well did he sleep last night? Is he feeling irritable? How's he doing with seasonal affective disorder? Oh, where's his stress at? Does he like his job? Right? All of a sudden it becomes a softening because it's not just about me and him. It is that he's a whole human that has many lived experiences outside of me that impact his mood, his world, but also for myself. Am I my best self? Am I really showing up, or am I tired, irritable, cranky, whatever it might be?
And I think that captures it well. How do we see the humanness in the other, or us, or both, depending on what we're working to forgive? How do we see the humanness?
And how do we learn from it? Back to that doormat. You don't have to be a doormat just because you forgive someone. They don't even have to know you forgive them, by the way. Forgiveness can just be an internal experience. But how do I forgive them. I'm letting go of this incident and I don't want it to happen again. It didn't feel good. So what am I going to do different next time? If there's anything I could have done. Sometimes it's truly out of your hands, but if there is something, some role you play, what could we do different next time?
Yeah. And that's the important piece for me too, is that you're not just forgiving without making steps to improve.
Yes.
So, and that in the context of relationships specifically, like, because there's forgiving our partner, but then there's also setting the boundary of like, look, I really don't want that to happen again. I know we're both human. We're both going to make mistakes again. What can we do to work together to kind of not have that happen again? Because so you're still setting the boundary, you're setting your need, you're asserting it, and you're also letting go in order to do that. You're not still hanging it over there. You're not saying, if you don't do this, then I'm leaving and threatening separation or whatever. You're letting go or making peace or accepting, however you want to use that language. And you're working with them to work towards kind of your need or boundary.
I think this just like popped in my head, but I also was thinking about, how do we also help our partner facilitate forgiveness with others, right? If my partner's having a hard time with forgiveness, do I sit there and feel the fire and say like, yeah, they're such an asshole? Or am I the partner that, this is hard, hun, and I know you're sad, and let's look at gratitudes, and how do we let this go? And how can I support you in moving forward? Right? Think about your role as their partner too, in the space of them forgiving themselves for something or someone else for something that has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Same with our kids. Like, we look at perfectionism in kids, and our daughter struggles with it, and encouraging her of like, if she makes a mistake, she's picked up language since starting kindergarten of, oh, I'm such a failure, or I'm so bad at this, and saying, no, hon, you're doing great. Or, I love that mistake you just made. Look how beautiful it turned out. Or we were at Urban Air this past weekend, and she was wanting to jump in the ball pit like her sister on a ring, and she fell off, and she was so embarrassed and bummed because her 2-year-old sister could do it. And instead of letting her kind of like wallow in that and stay in that place, we said like, I know that's disappointing. Let's try again. Right? Encouraging that forgiveness of herself and encouraging that movement out of perfectionism can be really helpful too as a partner.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. trying to think. I lost my train of thought as we're talking here. So I'm going to forgive myself for,
it happens
for that. Yeah. So it's gone.
I think of the movie Inside Out when you say that, where it's literally the train of thought and it's leaving.
It happens
I digress.
too often. Too often.
Forgiveness is complex and it is individualized. The way I forgive is not going to be the way my husband forgives, my friends forgive. It is going to be an individual process. We can't expect people to forgive the way we do. And we can't expect that it's going to look the same for us every time we forgive.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say now, as you brought that up, is my favorite question to ask people who are having trouble with that is, what do you need to forgive? And what would happen if you did or didn't forgive? Really to understand why they can't get there. And a lot of times it comes down to the power. They're holding this for power because it's scary to be vulnerable, and forgiveness can be vulnerable.
Absolutely. I think about like the risk and benefit assessment.
Yeah. Like what's holding me back from forgiving, and what would happen if I did? And what does it mean about me? Right. Those are kind of the three that I try to capture.
I want to check this out. Sometimes forgiveness is not something we have the tool set to do on our own. If you're not used to forgiveness, or your family didn't talk about forgiveness, or you don't have the tools, get support. Go to a therapist so that they can help you move through this forgiveness place. Just because you don't have the tools now doesn't mean you can't have them going forward.
And I think what you just said is we haven't said, and I think it's really important to note, is that it's a process.
Yes.
It's a journey, and it might be a very long time.
It's not just a week, team.
It's not, I forgive, let's go party now with the same, whatever, I don't know. But it is something that might take some time as you process through the emotions that you're holding on. Because part of it too is releasing the emotions that are with that.
Your somatic or bodily response.
Yes.
Getting your brain and nervous system to actually let it go.
The anger, the bitterness, right? Cognitively and physically, and how do you let go of those emotions? So then now I can focus on,
Sometimes it's actively leaning in and choosing it, even if it's hard.
I don't like that.
I know. It feels safer to say I'm mad and I'm going to punish you, but actively choosing when I'm leaning towards that punishment, catching myself and pulling myself back and saying, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to lean a different direction. It's hard. It is a journey. And if you are consistent and active in the work, it gets easier.
Yeah, a question that comes up for me too is, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, how much power is there in forgiving versus not? And I say that because I feel like there's a misconception of, by not forgiving, I'm holding power.
Yes, absolutely.
And accountability. But truly, by not forgiving, for me, and not working towards that, we're allowing that situation to have power over us.
Totally agree. And in forgiveness, I get to choose how I move forward. I get to choose what I learn, what I take from it, the boundaries I set. Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Forgiveness. Well, this has been another tough topic, forgiveness, and it transcends just our romantic relationship to pretty much any human relationship we have, including with ourselves. As always, if anyone has any questions or topic suggestions, feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.